Remove him before we close the cabin door. The words echoed through the executive section of the aircraft with enough force to silence every nearby conversation. Several passengers looked up immediately. A woman lowered her tablet. A businessman paused halfway through reading a report. Even two flight attendants near the galley exchanged surprised glances. Standing in the aisle was Melissa Harper, the senior member of the flight crew, her expression firm and unwavering. Her attention was fixed on a single passenger seated comfortably near the center of the executive cabin. Donovan Brooks looked up from the financial report displayed on his tablet. He wore a simple dark gray sweater, dark jeans, and well-worn leather shoes. There was nothing flashy about him. No expensive watch visible from across the aisle. No designer luggage positioned beside his seat. No obvious signs that he belonged among the executives and corporate travelers occupying the premium section of the aircraft. Melissa stepped closer. "Sir, I am going to need you to gather your belongings." Several passengers immediately turned toward Donovan. He blinked once and calmly set his tablet on the armrest. "May I ask why?" His voice was quiet and controlled. Melissa folded her arms. "There appears to be an issue with your seating assignment." Donovan glanced toward the boarding pass resting beside him. "I boarded using the seat listed on my reservation. We still need to verify a few things." Donovan nodded politely. "Then perhaps those things should be verified." The response seemed reasonable enough, yet Melissa's expression did not change. Around the cabin, whispers began spreading. Some passengers assumed there had been a booking mistake. Others quietly wondered whether Donovan had entered the wrong section during boarding. No one knew the truth. What they did know was that the tension inside the aircraft had become impossible to ignore. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to Donovan Brooks. Donovan remained seated. He showed no sign of frustration, no sign of embarrassment, no sign of urgency. That calmness seemed to confuse people more than the situation itself. Across the aisle, a passenger leaned toward his colleague. "If I were being asked to leave, I would be demanding answers." His colleague nodded. "Exactly." He does not seem worried at all. Near the front of the cabin, Flight Operations Coordinator Ethan Cole observed the exchange carefully. Something felt unusual. Passenger disputes occasionally occurred before departure, but this situation felt different. Donovan was not arguing. Melissa was not presenting evidence. Yet the pressure continued increasing. Melissa looked directly at Donovan. "Sir, I need your cooperation." Donovan met her eyes. "You have my cooperation." The answer caught her off guard. "Then please stand and come with me." Donovan glanced around the cabin. Nearly every passenger was watching now. He slowly returned his attention to Melissa. "Before I move anywhere, I would appreciate understanding the reason." Melissa hesitated. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed her face. Then she recovered. "The flight crew has concerns regarding your authorization to occupy this section." Several passengers exchanged looks. The statement sounded official, but it lacked specifics. Donovan simply nodded. "I see." Ethan frowned. The wording bothered him. Concerns were not evidence. Authorization questions normally produced immediate documentation. Yet nobody had produced any. Outside the aircraft windows, baggage vehicles moved beneath the afternoon sun, while airport personnel completed their routines. Inside the cabin, however, everything had stopped. The entire section seemed frozen around a single question. Why was Donovan Brooks being singled out? Melissa stood firm in the aisle. Donovan remained seated. Neither appeared willing to escalate the situation. Yet neither appeared willing to back down. As Ethan quietly opened an internal operations tablet to review the passenger manifest, he had no idea that the information he was about to discover would transform the entire flight. Donovan Brooks remained seated while the attention of the entire executive cabin settled squarely on him. The silence that followed Melissa Harper's request seemed to stretch longer with every passing second. Yet if Donovan felt any pressure, he gave no sign of it. He simply picked up his tablet again and reviewed a document on the screen as though he were sitting alone in the cabin. That calmness puzzled everyone. Passengers expected frustration. They expected arguments. Some even expected an emotional reaction. Instead, they saw a man behaving as though the outcome had already been decided somewhere beyond the walls of the aircraft. Melissa remained standing in the aisle. Her posture communicated authority, but the longer Donovan stayed composed, the more difficult it became for her certainty to influence the passengers around her. A businessman seated near the front finally spoke. Has anyone actually confirmed there is a problem with his ticket? His question lingered in the air. Melissa glanced toward him. The crew is handling the situation. The businessman nodded politely, but did not appear convinced. Across the aisle, another passenger lowered her headphones. If there is an issue, why is he still sitting there? Nobody answered. Ethan Cole heard the exchange while reviewing information on the operations tablet. He continued searching through the passenger manifest, expecting to find something simple. A seating error, a duplicate reservation, perhaps a boarding discrepancy. Instead, everything he saw confirmed that Donovan had checked in properly. The reservation appeared valid. The boarding process appeared valid. Even the seat assignment matched the records. Ethan frowned. He refreshed the screen and searched again. The result remained unchanged. Meanwhile, Donovan looked out the window toward the runway. Service vehicles moved beneath the afternoon sun. Ground crews completed their routines with quiet efficiency. Everything outside appeared orderly. Inside the aircraft, however, assumptions continued spreading. A passenger several rows back whispered to his colleague. Maybe he upgraded at the last minute. Another shook his head. No, this feels different. Melissa stepped closer once more. Sir, I am asking for your cooperation. Donovan looked up calmly. And you have it. Then why are you still seated? Donovan folded his hands. Because nobody has explained what rule I violated. The answer landed heavily throughout the cabin. Several passengers exchanged glances. It was a simple question, yet nobody seemed able to answer it. Ethan noticed the same problem. The more he examined the records, the more uncomfortable he became. He opened a secondary operational screen and entered Donovan's reservation number manually. For a moment, the system processed the request. Then something unexpected appeared. A small indicator beside Donovan's profile. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had never noticed that symbol before. Curious, he selected it. The system immediately displayed a message. Access restricted. Additional authorization required. Ethan blinked. He tried again. The same message appeared. His pulse quickened slightly. Restricted records were uncommon in standard passenger manifests. He glanced toward Donovan. The man still appeared completely relaxed. Melissa, however, seemed increasingly frustrated. We cannot delay departure indefinitely. Donovan nodded. I agree. Then help us resolve this. A faint smile appeared on Donovan's face. I believe that is exactly what I am doing. Several passengers struggled to hide their reactions. The answer was respectful, yet it carried a confidence that seemed impossible to ignore. Ethan looked back at the screen. The restricted indicator remained visible beside Donovan's name. Whatever it meant, it clearly did not belong on an ordinary reservation. And as he quietly opened another internal system to investigate further, he began to suspect that the calm passenger everyone was questioning might be the only person on the aircraft who already understood exactly how this story would end. The executive cabin had become a place of quiet conclusions. Every passenger seemed convinced they understood what was happening, even though almost none of them possessed actual information. Assumptions had filled the empty spaces where facts should have been. Some believed Donovan Brooks had somehow entered the wrong section of the aircraft. Others assumed he was refusing to cooperate with a routine verification process. A few even suggested that his calm behavior was evidence that he was trying to hide something. The irony was that the more people talked, the further they moved from the truth. Donovan remained seated beside the window, completely detached from the growing speculation surrounding him. He reviewed documents on his tablet with the same focus he had displayed since boarding. It was almost as though the conversation taking place around him belonged to someone else. Melissa Harper noticed the reactions spreading through the cabin and interpreted them as support for her position. To her, the situation appeared straightforward. She believed she was protecting procedures. She believed she was protecting standards. Most importantly, she believed she already understood the passenger sitting in front of her. That confidence prevented her from asking a more important question. What if she was wrong? Ethan Cole continued examining internal records. Every new search produced more questions than answers. The restricted indicator beside Donovan's profile remained visible. He opened another operational database and entered the passenger reference number again. The system processed the request for several seconds before displaying another unusual response. Enhanced authorization required. Ethan stared at the message. He had worked with airline systems for years and rarely encountered access restrictions connected to individual passengers. Curious, he attempted a secondary search path. The same result appeared. Restricted. He glanced toward Donovan once again. The man did not look like someone creating operational concerns. He looked like someone waiting patiently for others to catch up to information he already possessed. Across the aisle, the businessman who had questioned the situation earlier shook his head. I still do not understand what rule he actually broke. A woman seated nearby replied quietly. Nobody has explained one. Their observation was accurate. Despite all the discussion, no specific violation had been identified. Yet the pressure continued building. Melissa stepped forward again. Sir, this matter is becoming increasingly complicated. Donovan looked up calmly. Only for some people. Several passengers exchanged glances. The answer was simple, but it seemed to carry a deeper meaning. Melissa folded her arms. You appear very confident. Donovan smiled faintly. Confidence and panic are both choices. The response generated another wave of silence. Ethan noticed something else. The passengers who had initially sided with Melissa were becoming less certain. The longer Donovan remained composed, the harder it became to view him as the source of the problem. Confidence without aggression carried a strange kind of influence. It encouraged people to reconsider their assumptions. Ethan returned his attention to the tablet. Another notification had appeared. This one was different. Instead of denying access, the system displayed a reference to a linked corporate profile. His eyes narrowed. Corporate profiles were not normally associated with passenger manifests. He selected the notification. The system immediately blocked access. Restricted executive review. Ethan felt a chill run through him. Executive review. Those words changed everything. He quickly checked the information again. The notification remained. Across the cabin, Melissa continued believing she was only minutes away from resolving a passenger issue. The passengers continued building theories. Donovan continued reading reports. Yet beneath the surface, the story was quietly shifting direction. Ethan stared at the restricted message and slowly realized that the man everyone thought they understood might be connected to something far larger than anyone aboard the aircraft had imagined. And while assumptions continued spreading through the cabin, the first real clue had finally appeared inside the system. Ethan Cole could not stop staring at the screen. The notification remained exactly where it had appeared moments earlier. Restricted executive review. He refreshed the page. The message remained. He opened another operational channel. The same restriction appeared again. Whatever information was attached to Donovan Brooks was being protected by authorization levels far beyond his own. A quiet sense of unease settled over him. Passenger records were supposed to answer questions. This one seemed designed to create them. Across the executive cabin, Melissa Harper remained focused on what she believed was a simple problem. In her mind, the situation still revolved around a passenger who needed additional verification before departure. Yet every minute that passed made that explanation harder to defend. Donovan remained seated beside the window, reviewing documents on his tablet with the same calm focus he had shown since boarding. The passengers continued watching, some openly, others discreetly, but nearly everyone was paying attention. The businessman seated across the aisle leaned back and folded his arms. I have traveled for 20 years, he said quietly to the woman beside him. I have never seen someone stay this calm under this much scrutiny. The woman nodded. Maybe because he knows something we do not. Ethan found himself agreeing. He opened another internal database and entered Donovan's passenger reference number one more time. The system processed the request before displaying something new. A linked profile indicator appeared beneath the reservation details. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. That had not been visible earlier. Curious, he selected it. The system immediately responded. Access denied. Executive authorization required. Ethan sat back in disbelief. A linked profile. Executive authorization. None of it made sense. He checked the reservation itself again. Everything remained valid. Seat assignment valid. Boarding status valid. Identification verified. Every ordinary system confirmed the same thing. Donovan belonged exactly where he was sitting. Melissa stepped closer to Donovan once again. Her patience was beginning to wear thin. Sir, we still have unresolved concerns. Donovan looked up calmly. About what? The question hung in the air. Melissa hesitated. For the first time, she seemed unable to answer immediately. Several passengers noticed. Donovan waited quietly. Finally, she replied, "About your authorization." Donovan nodded slightly. "According to whom?" More silence followed. Ethan felt the tension immediately. It was becoming increasingly difficult to identify the actual issue. The businessman across the aisle exchanged another glance with his colleague. Earlier, they had assumed the crew possessed information the passengers did not. Now they were beginning to wonder if the opposite was true. Ethan looked down at the tablet again. A new notification appeared without warning. Corporate linkage detected. His pulse quickened. He selected the message. Access restricted. Contact higher authorization level. Ethan stared at the screen. Corporate linkage. Those words changed everything. This was no longer a passenger verification issue, at least not in the traditional sense. Something much larger existed behind Donovan's profile. Something connected to the organization itself. Across the cabin, Donovan calmly returned to reading his tablet. He showed no interest in defending himself, no interest in arguing, no interest in persuading anyone. It was almost as if he trusted the truth to arrive eventually, without his help. Ethan slowly looked up from the screen and studied him. The calm passenger everyone believed they understood was connected to systems that ordinary employees could not even access. And as another restricted notification appeared beside Donovan's profile, Ethan realized he was no longer trying to determine whether Donovan belonged on the aircraft. He was trying to understand why someone with that level of protection had boarded without revealing who he really was. The atmosphere inside the aircraft had shifted again. Earlier, passengers believed they were witnessing a routine dispute. Now uncertainty filled every corner of the executive cabin. Ethan Cole sat staring at the restricted notifications on his screen, trying to make sense of information that seemed deliberately hidden from ordinary access levels. Every path he followed ended the same way. Restricted. Executive authorization required. Corporate linkage detected. The messages were impossible to ignore. Across the cabin, however, Melissa Harper remained determined to resolve the situation before departure. To her, unanswered questions only increased the urgency. She stepped into the aisle once more and faced Donovan Brooks directly. "Sir, we cannot continue delaying this process." Donovan slowly looked up from his tablet. Then perhaps the process should reach a conclusion. The response was calm, respectful, yet it seemed to unsettle Melissa more than open resistance would have. Several passengers watched carefully. The businessman seated across the aisle leaned forward slightly. He no longer appeared convinced that Donovan was the source of the problem. Melissa took a breath. "I need a final answer. Are you willing to leave this seat while we complete our review?" Donovan studied her expression for a moment. Then he calmly placed the tablet on the armrest. "No." The single word immediately captured the attention of everyone nearby. Yet there was no hostility in his voice. No aggression. Only certainty. Melissa seemed surprised. "You are refusing a crew instruction?" Donovan shook his head. "I am declining a request that has not been justified." Silence followed. The distinction mattered. Several passengers recognized it immediately. Ethan certainly did. He looked up from the tablet and realized Donovan had been consistent from the very beginning. He was not resisting authority. He was asking for a reason, and nobody had provided one. Melissa folded her arms. "Then I may need to escalate this matter." Donovan nodded. "That is your decision." Once again, there was no argument. No confrontation. Just quiet confidence. The response seemed to frustrate Melissa even more because it offered nothing to push against. Ethan's tablet vibrated softly. A new internal message appeared. "Operational review pending. Contact corporate support." His eyes widened. Corporate support. That instruction did not belong in an ordinary passenger situation. He opened the notification. Additional details remained restricted, but the recommendation itself was clear. Someone inside the system believed headquarters needed to be involved. Ethan slowly looked toward Donovan. The calm passenger sitting by the window appeared completely unsurprised by any of it. Melissa took a step back. "Very well. We will proceed accordingly." Donovan nodded politely. "I expected you would." The businessman across the aisle exchanged another look with the woman beside him. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Everyone could feel that the story was approaching a turning point. Ethan stared at the corporate support notification one final time before reaching for his communication device. If headquarters became involved, answers would finally arrive. Until then, all anyone had were assumptions. Melissa believed she was escalating a passenger issue. Ethan suspected she was opening a door into something much larger. And as Donovan quietly picked up his phone and glanced at the screen, a subtle expression crossed his face for the first time all afternoon. It was not concern. It was not relief. It looked remarkably like anticipation. Donovan Brooks glanced at the phone resting beside his tablet. Around him, the executive cabin remained suspended in uncertainty. Passengers watched quietly. Melissa Harper stood near the aisle with her arms folded. Ethan Cole continued monitoring internal systems, waiting for information that never seemed to fully arrive. The tension had reached a strange point. Everyone felt that something important was about to happen, but nobody knew exactly what it would be. Donovan finally picked up the phone. The movement immediately attracted attention. Melissa noticed. Ethan noticed. Several passengers noticed. Yet Donovan did not appear concerned by their curiosity. He simply unlocked the screen, selected a contact, and placed a call. The line connected almost immediately. Donovan spoke in the same calm tone he had maintained throughout the afternoon. "Good afternoon. This is Donovan Brooks." He listened for a moment. "Yes, I am already on board." Another pause followed. His expression remained neutral. "There appears to be some confusion regarding authorization." Several nearby passengers exchanged looks. Melissa listened carefully. Donovan continued. "Would you please review the situation?" He nodded once. "Thank you. I appreciate it." Then he ended the call. The entire conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. No explanation. No dramatic announcement. No attempt to impress anyone. Just a brief exchange that seemed almost ordinary. Yet the effect was immediate. Ethan's tablet vibrated. He looked down. A new notification appeared across the screen. Operational review updated. His eyes narrowed. Before he could open it, another notification arrived. Corporate oversight activated. Ethan sat upright. He had never seen that status appear during a routine passenger review. Melissa noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated. "I am not sure yet." The answer did not reassure her. Across the cabin, another crew member received a notification. Then another. Quiet electronic alerts began appearing throughout internal devices connected to flight operations. Passengers could not see the messages, but they could see the reactions. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Earlier there had been confidence. Now there was uncertainty. Ethan opened the latest update. Several fields that had previously been hidden were beginning to unlock. Not completely, but enough to reveal something significant. Enhanced corporate review. Executive linkage confirmed. Ethan stared at the words. His pulse quickened. Executive linkage. The phrase appeared again. This time the system was no longer treating it as a possibility. It was treating it as a fact. Melissa stepped closer. "What are you seeing?" Ethan looked up. "I do not think this is a normal passenger file." Melissa frowned. "I already know that." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No. I really do not think this is a normal passenger file." The distinction mattered. For the first time, Melissa appeared genuinely unsettled. Donovan returned the phone to the armrest and calmly reopened his tablet. The situation seemed to concern him less than anyone else. The businessman seated across the aisle leaned toward his colleague. "That call changed something." His colleague nodded. "You can feel it." They were right. The mood throughout the aircraft had transformed. Internal systems were responding. Notifications continued arriving. Questions were multiplying. Ethan refreshed the operational review screen. Another message appeared. "Headquarters acknowledgement received." His eyes widened. Headquarters. Passenger issues did not normally involve headquarters. At least not issues like this. Melissa noticed the message reflected in his expression. "What does it say?" Ethan swallowed. "Someone at corporate has officially entered the review." Silence spread through the cabin. Even passengers who could not hear every detail sensed the importance of those words. Donovan remained seated by the window, completely composed. Outside, sunlight reflected across the wing of the aircraft. Inside, assumptions were beginning to collapse under the weight of information nobody had expected. And as another notification arrived marked priority review from corporate leadership, Ethan realized that the brief phone call everyone had just witnessed was not the climax of the story. It was the beginning of the revelation. The notifications from headquarters changed the atmosphere more than any argument ever could. Within minutes, The executive cabin felt entirely different. Earlier, passengers had watched a man being questioned. Now they were watching an organization respond. Ethan Cole stared at the latest updates appearing across his screen. Each new message carried more authority than the one before it. Headquarters acknowledgement received. Corporate leadership review active. Executive linkage confirmed. The wording alone was enough to make his pulse quicken. Across the aisle, Melissa Harper noticed the steady stream of notifications reaching multiple crew devices. She could not see every detail, but she could see the reactions. Concern had replaced certainty. Questions had replaced confidence. For the first time all afternoon, she seemed unsure of her position. Donovan Brooks remained seated by the window, quietly reading reports on his tablet. He had not changed at all. The remarkable thing was that everyone else had. The businessman seated across the aisle leaned toward his colleague. "Look around," he whispered. "The crew is reacting like someone important just entered the conversation." His colleague nodded. "Maybe someone already did." Ethan refreshed the screen again. Another message appeared. "Direct review authorized." He opened it immediately. Several previously hidden fields became visible. Not completely, but enough to confirm something significant. The profile attached to Donovan was connected to executive governance structures within the company. Ethan blinked and read the information again. Executive governance. Passenger records were not supposed to contain language like that. Melissa stepped closer. "Ethan, tell me what is happening." He hesitated. "I do not think we are looking at a passenger issue anymore." The answer immediately caught her attention. "Then what are we looking at?" Ethan glanced toward Donovan before responding. "I am still trying to understand that myself." Around the cabin, passengers continued observing the situation unfold. No one spoke loudly anymore. The confidence that had fueled earlier assumptions was gone. People were beginning to realize they had reached conclusions long before they possessed facts. A soft alert sounded from Ethan's device. Another notification. This one carried a higher priority designation than anything he had seen so far. He opened it immediately. Corporate leadership briefing initiated. His eyes widened. Melissa saw the reaction. "What now?" Ethan swallowed. Corporate leadership just entered the review directly. Silence followed. Even Melissa seemed stunned by that statement. Corporate leadership did not become involved in ordinary operational concerns. Everyone knew that. Across the cabin, Donovan calmly set down his tablet and looked out the window. The aircraft remained at the gate, but only barely. Ground operations were nearly complete. Soon the flight would either depart or face additional delays. Yet Donovan appeared completely unconcerned. A few moments later, another message appeared. Ethan opened it. This time he felt his breath catch. Executive stakeholder status under verification. He read the line twice. Then a third time. Executive stakeholder. The phrase echoed in his mind. Melissa noticed his expression immediately. "What does it say?" Ethan looked up slowly. "It says we may be dealing with someone connected to company leadership at a very high level." Melissa stared at him. For several seconds, she did not respond. The implication was impossible to ignore. Around the cabin, passengers sensed the shift even without hearing every word. The story everyone thought they understood was rapidly changing shape. Donovan was no longer the subject of a review. He was becoming the reason for one. Ethan continued watching the screen as new updates arrived from headquarters. Each message pushed the truth closer to the surface. And as the latest notification confirmed that senior corporate officials had personally joined the review process, one realization spread quietly through the aircraft. The answers were finally coming. And when they arrived, nothing about this flight would look the same again. The answer everyone had been waiting for arrived quietly. There was no dramatic announcement over the aircraft speakers. No executive entourage rushing through the cabin. No spectacle. The truth emerged the same way it had hidden itself from the beginning. Through official systems. Through verified information. Through facts. Ethan Cole stared at the newest message displayed on his screen. For several seconds, he simply read it without speaking. Then he read it again. The wording was unmistakable. Executive stakeholder status confirmed. Strategic governance authority verified. Corporate ownership interests acknowledged. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Everything suddenly made sense. The restricted files. The executive review notices. The direct involvement from headquarters. The protected access levels. None of it had been accidental. Across the cabin, Melissa Harper noticed his expression immediately. "Ethan." Her voice was quieter now. What did they confirm? Ethan looked up slowly. For a brief moment, he seemed unsure how to answer. Then he spoke. They confirmed who he is. The cabin fell silent. Melissa waited. Ethan glanced toward Donovan Brooks. The man remained seated beside the window, completely calm. Then Ethan looked back at Melissa. He is not simply a passenger. Melissa stared at him. Then who is he? Ethan swallowed. He is one of the executive stakeholders connected to corporate leadership. The words seemed to remove the remaining air from the room. Several nearby passengers exchanged stunned looks. The businessman across the aisle leaned back slowly. The woman beside him lowered her magazine. Nobody spoke. They simply listened. Ethan continued reading the official briefing. The information became even more remarkable with every line. Donovan was connected to governance decisions, strategic planning, executive oversight structures. The very systems reviewing his file existed partly because people in positions like his helped shape them. Melissa looked toward Donovan. For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty completely replaced confidence. The passenger she had spent hours questioning was connected to levels of leadership she had never imagined. Donovan finally looked up from his tablet. His expression remained exactly the same as it had been at boarding. Calm, respectful, composed. Nothing about him had changed. The only thing changing was everyone else's understanding. Melissa slowly approached him. This time there was no authority in her posture. No assumption. No challenge. Only questions. Mr. Brooks. Donovan looked up. Yes. She hesitated before speaking again. Headquarters confirmed your status. Donovan nodded. I assumed they would. The answer was simple, honest, without arrogance. Yet it carried more weight than any explanation could have. Ethan continued reviewing the official briefing. One particular line caught his attention. It explained why headquarters had responded so quickly. Donovan was not merely connected to leadership. He was connected to decisions affecting the broader organization itself. Suddenly, the title executive stakeholder felt too small to describe the reality. The businessman across the aisle slowly shook his head. All this time he whispered. His colleague nodded, and he never once mentioned it. That observation spread quietly throughout the cabin. It was true. Donovan had never introduced himself with titles, never mentioned influence, never revealed authority. He had allowed everyone to draw conclusions based solely on what they thought they saw. Melissa lowered her gaze briefly. The realization seemed impossible to escape. She had believed she was deciding whether Donovan belonged in the executive cabin. In reality, she had been questioning someone whose influence extended far beyond the cabin itself. As sunlight reflected through the aircraft windows and illuminated the quiet faces throughout the cabin, one truth became impossible to ignore. The man everyone had assumed needed permission to remain on board turned out to be one of the very people helping shape the organization behind the flight. For several long moments after the confirmation from headquarters, nobody in the executive cabin seemed to know what to say. The aircraft that had felt crowded with opinions only minutes earlier now felt remarkably quiet. Donovan Brooks remained seated beside the window, looking exactly as he had looked when he first boarded. The calm expression, the simple clothing, the relaxed posture. Nothing about him had changed. Yet everything about the way people viewed him had. Melissa Harper stood in the aisle holding her tablet at her side. Earlier she had believed she was protecting company procedures. Now she understood that she had been operating on assumptions rather than facts. Slowly, she stepped toward Donovan. The passengers watched closely. Ethan Cole watched as well. Everyone sensed that the final lesson of the day had arrived. Melissa stopped beside Donovan's seat. Mr. Brooks, she said quietly. Donovan looked up. Yes. She took a breath. I owe you an apology. The cabin remained silent. Donovan listened without interruption. I made decisions about you before I understood who you were. Donovan considered her words for a moment. Then he shook his head gently. The bigger problem is that who I am should not have mattered. The statement immediately captured the attention of everyone nearby. Melissa looked confused. Donovan continued. The question should never have been whether I held a title. The question should have been whether I had done anything wrong. Nobody spoke. The truth in those words settled over the cabin like a weight. Ethan felt it immediately. So did the passengers. Donovan had identified the real issue. The problem was not that people failed to recognize an executive stakeholder. The problem was that respect had been withheld until authority was discovered. Melissa lowered her eyes briefly. You are right. Donovan smiled politely. There was no anger in his expression, no desire to embarrass anyone. Most people are capable of better than their first assumptions. The businessman across the aisle slowly nodded. Several passengers did the same. The aircraft finally received clearance to begin departure procedures. Crew members quietly returned to their responsibilities. Yet the atmosphere remained reflective. People were thinking about everything that had happened. They were thinking about how quickly they had formed conclusions, how confidently they had accepted them, and how completely those conclusions had fallen apart once the facts arrived. Ethan approached Donovan before returning to his station. "May I ask something?" Donovan nodded. "Of course." Ethan glanced toward the tablet displaying corporate messages. "You knew what headquarters would find." "Yes." "Then why not tell everyone from the beginning?" Donovan looked toward the window. Sunlight reflected across the runway beyond the glass. "Because information changes opinions too easily." Ethan listened carefully. Donovan continued. "Character is revealed before information arrives. Once people know your title, they often treat you differently. I wanted to see how people behaved before they knew mine." Ethan slowly nodded. The answer made perfect sense. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, a quiet calm settled over the cabin. The tension was gone. The uncertainty was gone. All that remained was understanding. Melissa resumed her duties with a new sense of humility. Ethan returned to operations with a lesson he would remember for years. The passengers settled into their seats, carrying their own reflections into the journey ahead. Donovan simply returned to reading the report on his tablet, the same report he had been reviewing before any of this began. As the aircraft accelerated toward the runway, one final realization remained with everyone on board. Respect should not arrive after a title is discovered. Dignity should not depend on a position, a salary, or a place on an organizational chart. The person standing quietly in front of you deserves respect before you know their influence, before you know their success, and before you know their name. And sometimes, the person people are most eager to underestimate is the very person helping shape the future they depend on.